After filing for creditor protection last month, Hudsons Bay started closing stores. Now, it had planned to save 6 retail locations, but it doesn't look like that's going to happen. For more on that, let's go to Bruce Winder, president of Bruce Winder Retail. Bruce, thanks for joining us today. What kind of investment were they looking for to keep those 6 stores open, and why do you think they haven't been able to find it?
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Morella. I think at one point, they carved off the 6 stores recently and announced that, they said, hey, you can buy our online operation in the 6 stores and, it's going to require 80 million of investment. So, it was still a big investment. And I think that, just the writing was on the wall. Their business model is broken. The department store legacy business model is not popular anymore. Simon's is doing well, Holt Renfrew, but the traditional folks just bowed out. So I think we just find ourselves, in a situation that we probably all knew was going to happen, that, the Bay will cease to exist as we know it.
Wow. Okay. Let's talk about the other locations which started liquidation sales some time ago. I know that they've been trying to get others to pick up some of the leases. You mentioned Simon's, for example. Have any of these other retailers decided to pick up the leases?
Yeah, we don't know exactly who's interested, but there is about 18 companies who've shown interest in the leases, to about, I believe, 49 leases. So there is some action there on the lease side, but not necessarily on the operations side. I'm hoping that someone swoops in and buys the intellectual property so that they can, reboot this thing sort of with an 8 or 10 store boutique type chain, a la Roots or something like that. I'd love to see the brand survive, but, like I said, the current business model I don't think is viable.
Do you think even any online presence could survive if that's the way things have been going? Maybe they just do sort of focus in on a couple of brands that they're known to sell, and maybe they're the only ones who do sell those brands in Canada, and focus that online?
Yeah, interesting. I do think there is some opportunity purely online, at least to start, but probably selling the 4 stripe merchandise, the original Hudsons Bay merchandise, and maybe a select line extension beyond that. Again, think of someone like a Roots or Canada Goose building on the heritage of the brand. I think that could work online as well. So yeah, maybe we'll see what happens here.
Okay, so they are also trying to sell some of the artifacts since they have such a deep, deep history in this country. There has been pushback on that. I'm wondering what you think of this.
Yeah, I really, those artifacts probably belong in a museum, and some of them belong with Indigenous folks too, because of the history of the artifacts. So I really think that they need to bring in Indigenous folks, and they need to bring in someone in Canada who's responsible for museums and history, the government or something, to really sort of get involved in the auction process, because, and maybe even just, take them somehow, say that they're property, because it really doesn't make sense. This is really the fabric of our heritage, and it's much more complex than just selling fixtures at a store.
Okay, I also want to get your take on Frank and Oak, which is also closing all of its stores. I don't think they had many, something like 14 stores
14.
In the country.
Yeah, that's right.
How long were they actually in Canada, and are they closing for the same reason we're seeing a lot of brick and mortar closing?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. They're actually out of Montreal. They were put together by 2 founders out of Montreal in 2012, and they originally were online. They did a really good business. They targeted millennials, who were sort of in the office for the first time, their first office job, with environmental materials. And they got hit really hard with COVID. COVID really devastated them, went bankrupt once. They were bought by private equity. They rung up a ton of debt, unfortunately, about 70 million. And you know what? They just kind of lost their mojo along the way, and now they're being sold again, and they're closing all stores. So I wish them the best, but it's very difficult to survive in the fashion area, particularly with millennials who are very choosy and frugal, and these days anyways, and not afraid to sort of hop brands for what's new and the latest.
What happens with them for their intellectual property? Have they been able to capitalize on that?
Yeah, someone else bought them. I forget the name of them, but I believe it's a Montreal group has come forth and bought them. So someone else bought their intellectual property, and hopefully they can make a go of it, probably back online again, and just, live for a while at least without brick and mortar stores.
Okay, so I just do want to clarify something for the Bay, because they have said if they find an investor in their waning days, as the liquidation sales, I believe, are slated to start tomorrow, they will try and keep some stores open. Do you see that as a possibility at any point?
Well, Morella's anything is possible, but I think the probability is quite low, unfortunately, because we probably would have seen someone come out of the woodwork by now, but you never know. But yeah, definitely they've raised that. They said, look, if we can find a buyer, someone finances us, we're going to pull whatever stores we like out of liquidation. So hey, you never know. There could be like an 11th hour deal, but my gut tells me it's probably not going to happen.
Got it. All right, Bruce Winder, I think your gut is right on this one, but we'll see. Thanks for joining us. Good to have you.
Thanks, Marilla. Take care.